Sicha for Parshas Pinchas is in Chelik Yud Ches, volume 18 of Likutei Sichos. Concerning the previous Rebbe, whose birthday and Chag HaGeula is Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, the Frierdiker Rebbe says about himself that in the time that we were reading in the Torah, Parshas Pinchas, I was born, and most of the events in my life also occurred in the time of Parshas Pinchas. They're all hinted at in Parshas Pinchas, which means that the Geula and the Avodah and the events in general of the Frierdiker Rebbe's life are closely tied with the events of Pinchas. And Pinchas is the name of the Seder. So in the Seder, we have a reflection of the life of the Frierdiker Rebbe, as it is also hinted at in the fact that the Frierdiker Rebbe's name was Yitzchak, which has the same gematria as Pinchas, as it's mentioned in the Zohar, that the gematria of Pinchas is the same as Yitzchak. And since there is a numerical similarity, that shows that there's an inner connection, an inner similarity, particularly when the gematria is actually quoted in the Torah in the Zohar. Now, the Rebbe also had a first name, Yosef, and that's because Pinchas is from the children of Yosef. As the Torah itself says, Ve'elazar ben Aaron lokach lei mibneis Putiel mizera Yosef loi liisha vateled leis Pinchas. So Pinchas' mother came from the tribe of Yosef. The fact that Yosef does not have the same numerical value as Pinchas, and Yitzchak does, that shows that the aspect of Yitzchak is more openly related to Pinchas than Yosef, which is related to Pinchas in a more hidden way, as we shall soon see. The open similarity, the obvious similarity between Yitzchak and Pinchas, between the Frierdiker Rebbe and Pinchas, has to do with the zealousness of Pinchas, the vengeance, that Pinchas was moved to vengeance on behalf of the Jewish people. And that came about when there was a Jew having relations with a non-Jewish woman, and there is no halacha concerning the punishment for such behavior, other than kanoyim peigim bei, that those who are zealous can take the law in their own hands. But if they come to ask what is the law, they are not told what to do. It's up to them. They have permission to do, but they don't have any instruction to do. And the same is true, and that's what Pinchas did. He took the law in his own hands, and he punished the man and the woman by killing them. And in that way, he stopped the plague that was killing Jews by the thousands. This was also the manner in which the previous Rebbe went about protecting Jews in his times. His Mesiras Nefesh for strengthening Torah and defending Torah in Russia, which led to his arrest, was in a form of Mesiras Nefesh for which there is no instruction. There is no obligation in Torah to be that way. It is up to the person to voluntarily be moved to do this. As we find that there's Mesiras Nefesh required for 3 sins, but not more, for murder, adultery, and idolatry. But for other mitzvahs, positive mitzvahs, negative mitzvahs, there is no obligation to have Mesiras Nefesh, but there is permission given to be moved with that zealousness on behalf of the Jewish people. Now we can ask the question, the Mesiras Nefesh of Pinchas is described not in the Parsha of Pinchas, but in the previous, at the end of the previous Parsha in Balak. In Parshas Pinchas, it talks about the reward that Pinchas received for his Mesiras Nefesh. So why is it that that Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz comes out in the week of Pinchas rather than the week of Balak? So we'll understand this by first explaining the Gemara in Yerushalmi, where it says that what Pinchas did was Sholei B'Ratzon Chachamim, that the sages, the Chachamim of his generation, were not pleased with what Pinchas did. In fact, they wanted to excommunicate him. But then the heavenly voice came and said, that God promises to Pinchas an eternal, for him and for his children, an eternal covenant of kahuna. So this makes the Mesiras Nefesh and the Kanois of Pinchas much greater. Because before the prophecy announced that he was going to be rewarded for what he did, the sages, the Chachamim of his generation, were not pleased with what he had done. Which means that his Mesiras Nefesh was not only a physical one, he gave up not only his body, but he gave up also his soul. They were going to put him into excommunication. So he also suffered the disapproval, the condemnation of the sages of his generation. And even so, when he saw that V'yeshav Yisrael b'shittim, he saw that Jews were confused, that Jews were misguided, and that there was a plague raging among the Jews, he didn't stop to consider any of the consequences, neither physical nor spiritual, and he did what he had to do, Heishiv es chamosi ma'al b'nei Yisrael, to remove the anger and the plague from the Jews. This kind of devotion, with such a Mesiras Nefesh, comes from the etzem, from the essence of the Jewish soul. The essence of the Jewish soul is higher than the Torah itself. And therefore the Mesiras Nefesh that comes from the essence of the Jewish soul is higher than the limitations and the restrictions of the Torah. Where the Torah says that for these mitzvahs you do have Mesiras Nefesh, and for those mitzvahs you don't have Mesiras Nefesh. But in the essence of the Jewish neshama, there is a Mesiras Nefesh for every Jew under all circumstances. And that's why the reward for that was appropriate. The blessing of eternal kahuna, of eternal holiness passed on from generation to generation, this too goes against the logical restrictions of Torah itself. Because according to Torah, kahuna is something that comes as an inheritance from father to child. And since Pinchas at that time was not yet a kohen, it was therefore not logical that his children should be kohanim. But because of kinei lelikov, because of his kanois, because of his zealousness, because of his Mesiras Nefesh, he reached the level of elikov higher than the restrictions of Torah, and therefore he was rewarded also with a reward that according to the norms of Torah couldn't be possible. And yet it was given to him beyond the norm, beyond the restrictions of Torah. So from this we understand that it's in the Parsha of Pinchas where God tells him that he will be rewarded for what he did, because he was kinei lelikov, because he reached this level of Mesiras Nefesh and brought forgiveness for the people, for the Jewish people. That's what reveals and shows us the true nature of the Mesiras Nefesh of Pinchas. That it was not only a physical but also a spiritual Mesiras Nefesh. And in spite of that, in spite of the condemnation of the Chachmei HaTorah, in spite of the fact that even his neshama might suffer excommunication, he was moved in the core of his neshama to do what the divine will truly wanted, even though it was not explicitly stated in the Torah. The same is true also with the Frierdiker Rebbe. Not only was his work in spreading Torah and mitzvahs with Mesiras Nefesh of his body, where he literally gave up the well-being of his body, suffered physically, for all matters of Torah and mitzvahs, but he also was not obligated to do so. There was no mitzvah, no obligation to have this Mesiras Nefesh. As with Pinchas, ein maiden came. There was no halacha that demanded it. And therefore, there were many among the sages, among the Jewish leaders of that time, who couldn't understand the Rebbe's devotion, the Rebbe's Mesiras Nefesh, and did not agree with it. They themselves did not follow his example, as it was with Pinchas, who met with disapproval from the sages of his generation. And particularly, the Frierdiker Rebbe's Avodah was in such a manner, such a style, where he put in danger not only himself, but also all of his work, as we'll describe later, because the main battle and the main objection of the government, of the communists, was because he insisted on teaching the young generation and raising a generation of Jews with a good Jewish education to Nekeshel Beis Rabbim, which means that in addition to his personal Mesiras Nefesh, giving up his physical well-being, he was also putting in danger his neshama, his spiritual life, which means that he was putting into danger that which he stood for, that which he worked for, that which was his neshama, the soul of his life. And that's because in the circumstances at that time and in that country was endangering the very existence of Jews and Judaism, and the survival of the Jews were at stake, and therefore he didn't take into account any of the dangers and any of the consequences, but did with Mesiras Nefesh what had to be done for his fellow Jew. And so it is also for us. As in the story of Pinchas, and later with the Frierdiker Rebbe, it was revealed to all that what the Rebbe did was correct, that the true Aveda, which is necessary under those circumstances, was also revealed to the world, that everybody recognized and agreed that this was the right way to go, the proper approach. The difference only was that concerning Pinchas, it remains even today a halacha that is not given. There is no instruction given to take revenge or to be zealous for a person who is sinning. But concerning the Rebbe's Avodah, concerning the previous Rebbe's manner, the fact that he was released and the fact that he was victorious is a clear indication from above that this is the way we're supposed to be. It is Maiden came. We now have the instruction to behave this way, to have Mesiras Nefesh for another Jew. And so the Rebbe himself also instructed others, Meir Cain, he told others that this is the way to serve God through devotion to the Jewish people. And it is only in this way that the sparks and the embers of Judaism in that country were kept alive to such a degree that they and their children are now living Yiddishkeit Beris Kuhunas Olam. Now we'll understand the connection between Pinchas and Yitzchak and their gematria, because the style of Mesiras Nefesh is related also to the Akedas Yitzchak. Yitzchak at his highest level. Because concerning Yitzchak, his Mesiras Nefesh was also physical as well as spiritual. Yitzchak knew that the whole lifestyle, the faith and the belief and the devotion of Avraham to teaching the world about the oneness of God was really dependent on his following in his father's footsteps and continuing the project. By allowing himself to be taken to the Akedah, he was giving up not only his physical life, but also what his life stood for. Because without him, the project of teaching the world about God would also suffer. And yet, he went willingly to the Akedah because he heard that this is what God wanted. Now, the previous Rebbe also had the first name of Yitzchak, which is what makes him different from Pinchas. And we'll understand this based on something written in Kabbalah and Chassidus concerning the difference between Yosef and Yitzchak. And that is that Yosef is related to the letter Gimel, and Yitzchak is related to the letter Daled. In simple words, the difference between Gimel and Daled, Gimel stands for Gemilas Chesed, giving to the poor, and Daled means poor. So when you give to the poor, two things are happening. There is the giver and the receiver, which means also the preparation and the fact. Giving to the poor, that's a preparation of the mitzvah, an introduction of the mitzvah. But the poor man receiving his bread, that is the fact, the actual deed of the mitzvah. So in every giving, wherever there's a giver and a receiver, there is a gimel, which refers to the introduction, to the preparation of the mitzvah, of the relationship, and then there is the fact of the relationship when the receiver receives what he needs. The same is true also within a person himself, that there is the preparation one makes within himself to learn or to improve his behavior, and then there's the outcome, the fact, the result, when he actually does a good deed or a mitzvah. And so the relationship between Gimel and Daled that follow one another, every energy starts off with a Gimel, and then it ends up in a Daled. And that's why there are three worlds, Atzilus, Bri, Yetzirah, and then there's the world of action. And that's why also the Gimel is represented by the Midas HaYesod, which is the Mashpia, that has all three types of emotions contained within it. And then there's the Daled, which refers to Malchus. Malchus is the actual creation of the lower world. So the emotions are all gathered in Yesod. Yesod gives to Malchus, and Malchus actually creates. So here's what we see in the two names, Yosef and Yitzchak. Yosef and Yitzchak refer to the giving and the receiving, or the giving and the act, the preparation and the deed, which also refers to Naaseh v'nishma, the hearing, the understanding that leads to the doing, and then the doing itself. Now concerning Pinchas, his Mesiras Nefesh was only in the act, in that he did what he had to do. But the learning didn't come from him, because he wasn't a Nasi, he was not the head of his generation, he was not the teacher of his generation. On the contrary, his teacher was Moshe. So in Pinchas, although he of course was taught, he had the Nishma, but his strength was primarily in the doing, in the Nasa. And since the act carries with it the essence of the intention, the earliest intention is expressed in the final act, therefore by doing what he did, he revealed the highest level of connectedness with God, the Tchila that is expressed in the Seif Meiser. But when it came to the Frierdiker Rebbe was the head of his generation, and the Nasi Hu HaKol, and therefore in him both things were essential and strong, the Nase and the Nishma. And that's expressed in his name, Yosef and Yitzchak. Yosef refers to the Gimel, the preparation, the Nishma, and Yitzchak refers to the Daled, the actual deed. And we see this in actual behavior of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that on the one hand, he had Mesiras Nefesh for the most basic mitzvahs of Yiddishkeit, and for the simplest people, and for the youngest children, to teach them Aleph Beis, the beginnings of Yiddishkeit, and by sending Sheikhtim and Mayalim and Melamdim and Rabbonim to simply do the physical labor, the physical work of keeping Yiddishkeit alive. That was the Nase. And then on the other hand, the Frierdiker Rebbe excelled in explaining and revealing the deepest aspects of Torah, the Nishma, the understanding of godliness, on equal footing with the Nase. And that gives us another connection, another similarity between the Frierdiker Rebbe's name, Yosef Yitzchak, and Pinchas. And it also gives us a Heirah in our Aveda, how we should behave. By the Rebbe's Shluchim, the Rebbe demanded, and demands today also, Chatef ve'achel, chatef v'shti. As the Gemara says, there's no time to waste, grab what you can. Eat whatever comes to hand, drink whatever comes to hand, which spiritually means take advantage of every opportunity to do a mitzvah without stopping to consider and to measure and to judge, because there's no time for that. The main thing is Yitzchak, which is Gematria Pinchas. The main thing is the doing. We have to go out into the world and prevail on Jews that they should keep Torah and mitzvahs. Even if a person feels that he hasn't made the proper preparation, he doesn't have the nishma properly in his own Torah and mitzvahs, yet he shouldn't wait. And he should go immediately and help the other person with his nasa, with the doing of his mitzvahs. This ability to put yourself aside, to have a bittul of yourself in favor and on behalf of another Jew, which was what Pinchas did when he gave up his well-being in order to help and save the Jewish people, and this itself, the effect that he has on another Jew, that is the main emphasis of the Maaseh B'Poel, of the actual deed, because the deed is the main thing. And as it says, that thought is not equal to speech, and therefore, if you read the Shema only in thought, without saying the words, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah at all. You have to go back and read it again. And if you say it with your lips, you actually said the words, but you didn't have the proper kavanah, the nishma was not really great, yet you don't have to go back and say the Shema again, because in fact you did the mitzvah. And particularly when we find ourselves at the end of Golus, at the conclusion of the Ikvasa de Mashiach, and there is no time to wait until a person prevails on himself that he should make his proper preparations and he should have his nishma intact, because ot kumt Mashiach, and we have to use every second that is left to have Mesiras Nefesh for the Nase for another Jew. And even more than that, since we're doing this as a shliach of the Rebbe, of the Nasi Hadayr, so in your Nase there is the nishma of the Rebbe, which is the Yosef. Just as it was with Pinchas, he was taught by Moshe Rabbeinu, that was his Nase, and then he went and added, that was his nishma, and he went and added the Nase. And so when we go as shluchim of the Rebbe, then we have the Nase coming from the nishma coming from the Rebbe. The kavanah is already intact. All we need to do is add the Nase, complete the act. And this is also hinted at in Yitzchak, which is the Daled, the 4, because 4 means that the Gimel is included in the 4, and one more is added, which is the action. And through this Aveda, we are Zeicha, that Pinchas will be revealed as Eliyahu, because Pinchas is Eliyahu, and Eliyahu is the Mevaser HaGeula. Eliyahu is the one who announces the coming of Mashiach, and that also is on the level of Nasa. Eliyahu comes to bring together the hearts of the parents and the children and so on, and that is the Geula, the fourth Geula, the final Geula, that is associated with the number 4. There are 4 expressions of Geula for the lost Lave. There are 4 cups of punishment that God will give to the nations who have made Jews suffer, and accordingly there are also 4 cups of blessing, of nechama, of consolation, that God will give to the Jewish people b'karev mamash.